defining what is a Jew is, I think, it's extremely important to the people who are being massacred right now. There's a big group of people saying, we're the Jews, you're not Jews. We're able to kick you off this land. This is our land. God promised it to us, right? So
nobody says that, Kim. Nobody says that.
I don't understand why they're denying this. Vladimir Jabotinsky, one of the preeminent Zionist leaders in the early 1900s, whose acolytes included Menachem Begin and the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, he said of the Zionist project in Palestine that, quote, all colonization must continue in defiance of the will of the native population. So that is the reason for this conflict, that they feel that the land is entitled to them because of the Bible, because they're Jewish.
So is she saying that the reason for the bombing in Gaza right now and so on, it's because the Jews looked over and they said, hey, there's a bunch of non-Jews over there. Let's kill them and take their land.
What are all those non-Jews doing over there?
Right. So that's the reason. And it's not because there was this huge attack and then there's took a bunch of hostages and then Israel demands the surrender of Hamas and demands to get their hostages back, and they're going to continue with a war until those things happen. It's not because of that. It's just, hey, they saw, hey, there's some non-Jews over there.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Or haven't you watched Daniel Kikichu? Israel staged that. They staged it.
Yeah, there are a lot of valid questions about whether the Israelis had prior knowledge of the October 7th attack. It certainly seems plausible. A lot of people brought up the fact that Israel is the size of New Jersey. Why did it take so many hours for reinforcements to arrive where the October 7th attacks were taking place? And then during the fighting on October 7th, according to Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone and others, the Israelis implemented the Hannibal Directive, which states that in order to prevent Israeli military personnel or civilians to be taken hostage, you can actually not only kill the hostage takers, but to kill the hostages as well, to prevent them from being taken over into Gaza. We don't know how many of the fatalities that occurred on October 7th were the result of the Hannibal Directive, but it looks like that it's not an insignificant number. Now, I'm not denying that Hamas committed its own share of atrocities, but there are a lot of lies about what really happened on October 7th. The most infamous of which is the claim of the 40 beheaded babies. This was just straight-up atrocity propaganda. Like the hoax in the run-up to the first Gulf War in 1991, that Iraqi soldiers were throwing premature babies out of incubators. So any claim made by Israeli officials needs to, at best, be treated with the utmost circumspection.
Even Bill Clinton recently came out and he said, when I've had to explain to young people what was offered to Yasser Arafat and what he turned down, they can't even understand. Like, they think this is just a conflict of like the Jews trying to oppress and kill other people. They wanted to make peace. They agreed to the plan where Yasser Arafat got 95% of what he wanted, a capital in East Jerusalem and everything, and he turned it down. So
but it wasn't enough. We wanted more. We also wanted everyone to return to
from
the place
the river to the sea.
I mean, do these guys ever stop and think, why is it the case that Israel's holding all the cards? Now, they make it seem here like finally giving the Palestinians their own state is just oh so generous and benevolent of the Israelis. Whereas in actuality, the Palestinians would be getting only 22% of the land to which they are indigenous. And on the other hand, the Israelis, who are largely descended from European settlers, would keep 78%. By the way, I actually do wonder what these guys actually think if Palestinians even deserve their own state. Again, the far-right faction in Israel, Likud, and even further to the right, they do not believe that there should be any Palestinian state in the region. So it's very dishonest to pretend that Zionists actually believe that the Palestinians deserve any part of the land at all.
Yeah, that's actually happened multiple times where you actually ask them, hey, what do you want that is not just us giving you all of Israel? What will you actually agree to for a second state? Offering a two-state solution. What will make you accept this solution. And they'll come up with a list. We want all these things. And there are specific reasons for not granting everything. They're like, and it's situations like, no, you want the land on top of this cliff with this Jewish village down at the bottom of the cliff. You can literally just toss bombs down on there all day long. We can't give you that spot. And so that's what, when you say 95% and not all of it, it's situations like that. It's like, we can't give you that because that would give you the perfect opportunity to kill as many Jews as you want.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't give you that. We also have to guarantee our own safety. But they'll end up with 95%, 97%, 98% in different situations of everything they want. And they always 100% of the time turn it down. And you ask any of these Kim Iverson idiots, why don't they have their own state? Oh, because the Jews won't let them, because the Jews want to take all the land.
By the way, these the way that they're characterizing the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis over finally reaching a deal as to how to partition the land, with the Israelis offering the Palestinians up to 95% of what they wanted, and the Palestinians just refusing any compromise at all. The way that they're characterizing this, that is not how it all went down. And for context, keep in mind that this would be 95% of 22% of the Palestinians' native land. If you want to know more about that, I would actually suggest there's a podcast with Aaron Mate, also of the Gray Zone, going back and forth with, I believe his name is Noam Dworman of the Comedy Cellar podcast. They really get into it, debating all of the details of these peace negotiations. And I think they both do a pretty good job of representing both sides. And they're both obviously extremely well read on the topic. So if you want to know more about that, I'll put a link in the description.
There's the end of times prophecy. So you've got a group of Christians out there that will support this beginning of the Jewish nation because they believe in an end of times prophecy that says there would be a great gathering of Israel back into that homeland. And when the gathering of Israel happens back in Jerusalem, the Messiah will return. So you've got a group.
So here's the thing. From my observation so far, looking at Christian reactions and Christian politics and so on, it seems that the majority of Christians seem to be tolerant, leading from like between tolerant and supportive toward Israel. Those who are explicitly and outwardly supportive of Israel, from what I have seen, from what I can observe, I wonder if there are some statistics on that, are not people who are supporting it because of some end time prophecy. I keep seeing this claim, oh, it's because the Christian Zionists, they're crazy, they want to bring about the end times and so on. I don't see that anywhere. I just don't get it.
You could have some people like that who are interested in end times for whom this could be a factor, but usually it's a belief in human rights, and you're basically agreeing with the overall argument that you're right. If you say we do not feel safe amongst people who could turn on us in the drop of a dime, and in other words, the argument for not having an Israel before World War II would have been, what are you talking about? You guys live in various nations. Those nations will protect you. And then all of a sudden you get what happened in World War II, and no, they didn't protect you. And other nations, even when you're trying to flee to them, they don't protect you. And so you guys have a really good case, a really, really good case that you need a place. That's a lot of the basis for support. And then there's just the historical connection and so on with the biblical Israel and so on. So you have a lot of different issues, but I've said before, for me, it's like a human rights issue. It's I agree that they do need a place.
That may be true. The majority of Christians in the world are not evangelical Christian Zionists. And that is the group that preaches this end times prophecy. So apparently what they believe is that the old covenant of the Torah and the new covenant of Christ continue to exist side by side until today, and will continue in this fashion until Christ's return. Christian Zionism is actually quite at odds with Orthodox Christian beliefs about Jewish people, the Holy Land, biblical prophecy, etc. And I say Orthodox with a small o here. I don't mean the Eastern Orthodox churches. I mean how all of Christendom has interpreted the theology of the New Covenant outside of this comparatively novel idea of premillennial dispensationalism. Now, to Orthodox Christian doctrine, this belief is heresy because it teaches that Christ did not fulfill and supersede the Old Covenant, and that he is not the Savior and Redeemer of all mankind, because, as John Hagee, a very prominent and influential Christian Zionist pastor, says, Jesus was not the Messiah of the Jews, he was only the Messiah of the Gentiles. Now, Hagee believes that Israel, and by Israel he means the Jews around the world today and the modern state of Israel, are God's earthly people, and the church is God's heavenly people. So people like Hagee and his ilk believe that Jews must have control of the Holy Land in order to bring about the return of the Messiah. And the war, the conflict, the genocide that comes about with this is all part of the Armageddon prophesied in the book of Revelation. Now, again, that's not something that the majority of Christians in the world believe, and I will go with what Mr. Wood says, that it's probably not something that the majority of Christians who support Israel believe. They may have other reasons for supporting Israel. However, the Christian Zionists in America are extremely influential in politics, especially in Republican politics. There are a number of prominent politicians, Mike Pence, Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, Nikki Haley, that appear with Hagee and are featured speakers at these Christian Zionist conventions. And evangelicals like Pence are very close to the aforementioned Pastor Hagee. So, and these Christian Zionist organizations, they raise a lot of money for these politicians. They are a problem, but they are a very large and influential group. They might not be the majority, but they have a lot of power and influence. So their bizarre biblical beliefs about the end times prophecy is influencing U.S. policy towards Israel. So that's not an exaggeration.
It was Nazis during World War II and prior arguing Jesus wasn't a Jew against the overwhelming consensus. And like Richard Steigman Gall talks about this in his book, The Holy Reich, is that some of the Nazi high command was pushing like a new form of Christianity, which is just some sort of neo-Marcion nonsense. They called it positive Christianity. Yeah. And that part of that ideology was there was no atonement. They reject the Old Testament. Jesus was a martyr for the white Aryan cause, and he wasn't a Jew. And they're pushing against Catholics and Protestants who are saying he obviously was. I mean, this is just nonsense. So they had to build up this whole, house of cards that he wasn't a Jew, reinvent Christian theology that was just blatant heresy. I mean, if anything, they were the ones trying to push against the consensus. And like, if anyone was trying to say Jesus was a Jew, it was in response to that absurd nonsense.
Yeah, so here it seems like what they're trying to do is to conflate Kim Iverson's argument here with the Nazis. That's something new. That's a common tactic of Zionists, that if you are criticizing or if you're against Israel because of this or that reason, then therefore you must be an anti-Semite. Now, I will say, however, that when taking on the question of whether or not Jesus is a Jew, it does get a little bit dicey because there is indeed a tradition among anti-Semitic literature that fixates on Jesus' racial identity. The most infamous example is probably Walter Grundmann, a German biblical scholar who lent his services to the Third Reich and was a Nazi party member. He tried to argue that Jesus was a Galilean who were a separate race from the Judeans, but were forced to convert to the Judaic religion. But Kim Iverson is no anti-Semite. I'm not a regular viewer of her show, but I follow her on Twitter and watch from time to time. Now, on the one hand, as I've said, she still could have done a better job in her approach to this topic. But on the other hand, it is, of course, a valid pursuit to interrogate thoroughly this matter of what is meant when it's claimed that Jesus is a Jew. Now, I will say more on these labels and smears of anti-Semitism at the conclusion of this series of videos.
Yep. So Nazis made a very, very big attempt at suppressing Christianity as it was, and changing it, centralizing it, and creating their own new form of Christianity, while detaching any Jewish aspect from Christianity and making it basically just a complete overhaul of the entire moral system of Christianity, in line with whatever Hitler wanted, because the Führer is always right. That was the policy there. But until then, I mean, lots of very, very well-known scholars throughout Christian history have repeatedly maintained that Jesus was a Jew.
Against us, how could you do this to us? And I think that is a really understandable reaction, is to say, why would you kill us? Your God was one of us. But that has evolved. And I think the main reason why Jews today would say Jesus was a Jew and try to convince Christians of this is to gain support for the creation of Israel and the horrors that it takes to make it happen. So again,
also never happened.
AP, that's actually what happened.
Powerful.
Some people will say to me, Kim, it doesn't matter. Genocide is bad, no matter what. It doesn't matter what you believe. None of that is relevant, but it is. Because again, you're not going to convince people who believe in religion. You're not going to convince them by saying, look, genocide is bad no matter what, and you should just agree with that, and you should just stop supporting it. They're still going to support it if they believe that this is what their God wants them to do.
Wait, you hear this? So now we believe that since Jesus was a Jew, that therefore we have to support the Jews as they commit genocide. And then
please tell me which Christian believes such a thing, Kim.
Yeah, please. That's what's amazing. Like, what has she said at any point? We've listened to her for several minutes now. What has she said at any point that anyone that I've ever seen anyone believe? And she's putting this forward as this is the belief. This is standard. I've never seen anyone who believes the thing she's saying. And she's saying this is just standard belief, and she's fortunately she's here to rescue us from things that we don't believe at all.
I just find it so funny. It's like repeatedly she tells us that this is something that we have been taught after the Holocaust, and it has not been corrected. Here is the Greek text.
So now we're actually getting into where the main point of contention is. How was the word Jew used during Jesus's time versus how it is used today? And as I've already gone through, there were and still are a lot of different meanings of what has become the English word Jew today. And even in the Bible, it can mean several different things.
Here's the Greek text, okay, we talked about it earlier, John 4:9. Here's the Greek text. You see this word here, Kim, and everyone else, gropers. You see this word? You see where it says Jew? Jew is just the English word, the English version, the English way of using a term that went from Yehudi or Yehaya or Ioudaios or Juden and so on into English as Jew. And it just comes from this here. This is the original Greek, Ioudaios. She refers to Jesus as a Ioudaios. He does not object to it. In fact, just a few verses later, right here at around 22, you will have Jesus himself saying to her that we worship. So you worship what you know not. We worship what we know, for salvation is of the Jews. So he's referring to himself and his community as Jews.
As for this passage in John chapter 4, again, the Greek, as they point out, is Ioudaios. There are actually a lot of fascinating things going on in this passage, especially with the way that Judean or Ioudaios is being used here. What this passage in John doesn't mean is that Jesus would be a Jew in the sense of what it has come to mean today. And I will come back to this passage in John a little later.
Defining what is a Jew is, I think, it's extremely important to the people who are being massacred right now. There's a big group of people saying, we're the Jews, you're not Jews. we're able to kick you off this land. This is our land. God promised it to us, right? So
Nobody says that, Kim. Nobody says that.
And even if she was right, this is just an appeal to emotion. She's very fallacious. She doesn't understand how logic works. Like, none of this, the current conflict has nothing to do with a basic understanding of how many definitions the word Jew has.
I don't understand why they're denying this. The whole reason why the Zionists ultimately decided on Palestine in the late 1800s, when there's a lot of talk about the Jews of Europe finding a homeland for themselves somewhere in the world, one place that almost became a Jewish state is in Uganda. But the reason why that was abandoned and they ultimately decided on migrating to Palestine was because that is the ancestral homeland of the Jews, the biblical homeland. And of course, if you're going to immigrate to that land en masse, there are already native people living there, the Arabs, and what are you going to do with them? Vladimir Jabotinsky, one of the preeminent Zionist leaders in the early 1900s, whose acolytes included Menachem Begin and the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, and who has been labeled a fascist by Rabbi Shapiro and other scholars. And not just in the empty hyperbolic sense of fascist either, but in that he actually applied fascist ideology to Zionism. He said of the Zionist project in Palestine that, quote, all colonization must continue in defiance of the will of the native population. So that is the reason for this conflict, that they feel that the land is entitled to them because of the Bible, because they're Jewish, and that they are the right, you hear this all the time. You have Zionists, for example, like Barry Weiss. She is not a religious Jew, as far as I know. She is secular. But she says that the Jews are the indigenous people of that area. And so therefore they have a right to that land. Ben Shapiro makes this argument. So I don't know why they're denying it. This is a very, very popular claim for Zionists. And in reference to the fact that most Zionists, from Herzl to Jabotinsky to Benjamin Netanyahu today, are secular and not in any way religious, Israeli historian Ilan Pape said, most Zionists don't believe in God, but they do believe that he gave them Palestine.
Today, the identity of Jews amongst Jews themselves can't even be defined. They can't even define what is a Jew.
Jesus
they
was a
can.
Jew.
They can. It's just you have multiple definitions because you can mean different things. You can mean, is someone, when you say is someone a Jew, you can mean, are they practicing the religion, or are they practicing a specific version of the religion? You could mean someone who descends from one of the tribes. You could mean multiple things.
Again, as mentioned, there are a lot of different meanings to the word Jew. Orthodox Jews like Rabbi Shapiro would argue that it only applies to people of the Jewish religion. But then you have Zionists who wanted to make it into a nationality, a Jewish nationality. You have people who claim that it's an ethnicity. Anti-Semites and Zionists alike will claim that Jew is a race. But one thing's for certain is that we can't anachronistically apply these interpretations of the word Jew to the people living at the time of Christ. Now, as I've mentioned before, in the ancient world, your national identity was very much bound to your religious identity. But this concept of religion as something that could transcend nations was already emerging in Judaism by about the 3rd to 2nd century BC, and it really took off with the growth of Christianity in the 1st century AD. So even if in the Greco-Roman periods of ancient Palestine, being a Judean was linked to your nation or your genealogy, that national or ethnic identity is not what made you a Judean. The religion of the Torah wasn't something that was exclusively based on one's genealogy. Being a Jew didn't necessarily have to mean you were of the tribe of Judah or any of the other 11 tribes of Israel for that matter. The essential thing was your adherence to this religion of Jehovah and his Torah. This concept of being a Jew in purely an ethnic sense did not exist at all at this time. So the adherents of the Torah religion may have tended to be of the Judaic nation, but they didn't have to be. So, yes, the Israelites may have gone on to form their own nation and polity, but that was something that overlapped with and grew out of their religion. The religion wasn't created by the state. Now, one interesting thing that both Jews and Christians believe is that the Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, is a spiritual nation, not a physical territory, not a bloodline. If you accept God's covenant, you become a member of the nation of Israel. Now, of course, Jews and Christians identify their respective religions by the different covenants. The Jews with the covenant with Moses, and the Christians by the blood of Christ. But both religions transcend the temporal nations in favor of the eternal nation. And this was a unique concept in the Greco-Roman world.
Persian Jews that have completely different culture than Ashkenazi Jews in New York, who have a totally different
Completely
culture
wrong.
than Ethiopian Jews, right? So they're not even culturally the same.
Oh, really?
In the culture, the only thing that they would have that is culturally the same would be the religious aspects, which then goes back to, well, then is it a religion? And if it is a religion, then how can all of these non-religious people?
It is not just a religion; it is a traditional aspect. It is an ethnic aspect, which, as a word, encompasses a lot of different things, including tradition, religious beliefs, language, and so on. The Jewish communities, independently from each other, preserved aspects of the Hebrew language, no matter where they were, which is how it was also not impossible for Jews to come together and re-establish Hebrew as their common language.
Every religion influences the culture that it's introduced into. You know, for example, if you take a Catholic, you take a Catholic from the United States, a Catholic from France, a Catholic from Argentina, a Catholic from the Philippines, they're going to have a lot of cultural differences. However, there are also going to be similarities. There are going to be things that they all have in common just by virtue of the fact that they are all Catholics. So it's the same with Judaism. The religion is going to influence the ethnicity. It is going to influence the culture. But these are overlapping dimensions. So the word Jew in and of itself and the word Catholic in and of itself, that these terms, the term Catholic or the term Jew, these terms refer primarily to a religion first, above all.
You've got Russian Jews who are also really white. You've got Persian Jews. You've got Iraqi Jews, right? You've got them all over the place from different races. You've got Asian Jews. So these are not, so it's not a race. It's not a bloodline because you can convert into it.
That's the same thing as what you just said.
my
But
God.
oh my God,
There's a couple of
Yeah,
reasons.
think about what she's saying. She's saying since there is no one meaning of the word Jew, therefore there is no meaning to it.
The way that Israel, the Israeli state, wants to define Jew, it is almost like there is no meaning to it. So if Jew implies that you adhere to a monotheistic religion that believes in the Hebrew God, why is it the case that in Israel you are still considered a Jew even though you might be an atheist? You believe in no God. So because Zionism defines Jew more in these racial terms, as long as you have, I think that according to Israeli law, as long as you have a Jewish grandparent of either sex, you are qualified for the law of return. You know, it doesn't matter where in the world that you're born. You can be born in America, born in Europe, born in Russia, born in Iran, wherever. As long as you have what they considered this Jewish ancestry, then you can move to Israel and become a citizen there. Now, I'm of the inclination that Rabbi Shapiro is correct in that you cannot divorce the Jewish identity from the religion. I personally find it difficult to accept that someone who is an atheist, a secularist, an agnostic can still at the same time be a Jew. Now, because of what I've already said about the way that religion shapes culture and ethnicity, it is fair to say that an atheist can be of a Jewish background, that he may have ancestors who were Jews. Ethnically, he may be an Ashkenazi, a Sephardi, a Yemenite, and his nationality may be American, could be Russian, even Israeli, but he himself cannot be a Jew because the term Jew at its core denotes a religious identity, and an atheist has no religious beliefs. This would be like calling Richard Dawkins a Christian. Yes, he may identify as a cultural Christian because he's English, and English culture for more than 1,500 years has been influenced and shaped by Christianity. And again, we see how tricky it can be to separate religion and culture and ethnicity because there is so much overlap. But still, at the end of the day, if Richard Dawkins does not believe in the core tenets of Christianity, then he wouldn't, in my view, and I would say the view of most reasonable people, meet the definition of a Christian. Now, yes, you can argue that it is a ethnic or national identity because the term Jew, as in the religion, as it still exists today, comes from Judaism, which was a political, an ethno-geographical, and a national identity, or was at least based on one. And Judean, in turn, comes from Judah, which is based on a tribal identity. But there's a lot of holes and contradictions in this line of thinking. Now, traditionally in Jewish religious teaching, being born to a Jewish mother isn't a bloodline or racial thing, it's a theological thing. According to them, it's a way to identify someone whose disembodied soul was at Mount Sinai thousands of years ago. On the other hand, traditionally the identification with tribe was patrilineal and was based on bloodline. Judea as a national and political entity no longer exists, so how would you know for sure that that's where your ancestors came from? DNA evidence alone can't tell you exactly what ancient nationality or state that your ancestors belong to. Anyone with Levantine DNA could probably claim to be Jewish. Furthermore, there were also Gentiles who also were subjects of the ancient kingdom of Judea and who didn't worship Jehovah or keep the Torah. Could those descendants of those Gentiles be considered Jews today just because of their genealogical relationship to people in Judea? But because Zionism defines Jew along more of these racial terms, the Israeli definition of Jew does have a lot of contradictions. An example of this is the famous case of Brother Daniel, born Shmuel Oswald Rufeisen. He was a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor who became a Catholic monk with the baptismal name of Daniel. In 1959, he sought to immigrate to Israel, but the Supreme Court decided that he wasn't eligible for immigration under the law of return because he had become a Christian. So the definition of Jew, according to the Israeli state, is full of all these contradictions. So you can convert into the Israeli Jewish nationality by converting to the Jewish religion. Israel will recognize converts with no Jewish background at all, like Ivanka Trump, for example. But then you have secularists who don't observe the Jewish religion at all. Netanyahu is one of these, as were virtually all of Israel's founding fathers. They are also considered Jewish. But then you have people who are of a Jewish background but believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They are not Jewish as per Israeli law. Make it make sense. If Jew is a nationality, then someone's religious views should be completely immaterial, especially if Israel wants to claim itself to be this modern Western democracy. The same way that in France or in the US or Australia, you can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Jew, you can be an atheist, you can be whatever religion or non-religion that you want. That doesn't have anything to do whether or not you are an American citizen, a French citizen, an Australian, whatever. So if there are these contradictory definitions of Jew, then it does sort of become this term with no meaning. So Kim Iverson does have a point with that.
Much of religion outside of Christianity and Islam, for example, was generally not seen in quite the same. Judaism and many other religions were historically not seen in quite the same way as a community as Christianity and
You
Islam are,
said
for
not
example.
see. You said not seen.
Because Christianity and Islam are proselytizing religions, they are not restricted to a certain community that just preserves and continues it. In Hinduism, which is also a very large religion, you have a similar aspect, an aspect that is similar to Judaism, for example, where it generally goes together with a certain tradition. Whether now people are born into it or out of it, or people join it or not, does not really make much of a difference. You can generally identify Hinduism in history with a certain population. You can generally identify Judaism in history with a certain population. It is an ethno-religion insofar that it is not just a religious belief, it is rather a tradition, a heritage, a tribe, together with religious beliefs, and so on.
Now, he does have somewhat of a point here, but you could kind of say the same thing about Christianity or Islam. Again, like I said before about religion being at the center, being the keystone of our ethnicity. Although Judaism does tend to be less actively proselytizing than Christianity or Islam in comparison, there have been episodes of mass conversions in the past. There was the kingdom of Adiabene. The Hasmoneans forced their subjects to convert to Judaism. There's evidence that it happened in Khazaria in the early medieval period. And so these mass conversions show that Judaism is not exclusive to one ethnic or national group.
So today, when we say Jesus was a Jew, what people are trying to tell you is that Jesus was a Pharisee, but he wasn't a
my
Pharisee because they're
God.
equating.
I think I understand her logic here. To most people, when you say the phrase Jesus was a Jew, people are going to associate with what the religion is today, the rabbinic Judaism, which is descended from Pharisaic Judaism. The implication there is that Jesus is a Pharisee when he most certainly was not.